To take us into this next part of the journey, it is a pleasure for me to introduce a dear friend and a colleague, a personal friend as well, someone who has been part of JANM for a long time, has actually had a couple of different stints here. He is now leading the organization California Humanities, and so if you've been following what was going on with the NEH, you know the difficult job and task he has ahead of him, but no one is quite experienced enough as Rick is to be able to lead that organization at this time. It's an independent nonprofit organization that promotes the humanities, and more we're hearing about the importance of the humanities, particularly in conversations around democracy. It promotes history and literature and art and culture to connect people, and it fosters understanding of diverse cultures and strengthens California's democracy through grants, programs, and projects in local museums, libraries, and communities statewide. It supports local initiatives, documentary filmmaking, and public events aimed to give voice to often unheard stories and to explore shared human experiences. It is such a pleasure for us here at JANM to welcome him back, our dear friend, Rick Noguchi.
Thank you, Jim, so much for that introduction. And thanks, everyone, for being here today. I think this has been a really important day and just great conversations from all the panelists. And today, for me, is one of those 360 moments for me to give some framing remarks in this space, because the National Center for the Preservation of Democracy, now called the Center for Democracy, I had the privilege of working with the late Senator Daniel Inouye back in the late 1990s in securing funding from the Department of Defense to build the NCPD. And you heard that correctly. The funding for this space came from the Department of Defense through the military. That's a whole other story that I won't talk about today. But I had an amazing opportunity to learn from the senator his vision for this space. And back then, the NCPD was dedicated to the study, preservation, and interpretation of democratic issues. In many ways, it was an extension of JANM's work into the future of intersectionality. Today, the idea of preservation at the NCPD takes on a different meaning, the need to preserve democracy itself. Senator Inouye envisioned the NCPD as a place for democracy in action. So it is fitting that JANM is hosting the symposium today. So thank you to Ann Burroughs and Bill Fujioka for their unflinching leadership. And thank you, Jim Herr, for providing the continued vision of democracy in action. So we now turn to the power of art and culture in democracy. And I've been asked to provide some framing remarks. So I'd like to begin by saying that the essence of democracy is built on and by societal norms and values. It is our culture that shapes democracy, and it is culture that will save democracy and preserve democracy. It is the artists and the creatives, the poets and the writers, the thinkers and the scholars who shape and challenge our worldview and our culture to continually strengthen our democracy. Their voices, their stories, their work augments and enhances the narrative of who we are as Americans. Their work helps us think critically and develop empathy, both of which are necessary for a healthy democracy. And this is what is being challenged. The culture wars has always been about social conflicts over fundamental values and beliefs and lifestyles. It is a battle over the narrative of inclusion or continued oppression by existing systems. And as America became more racially diverse, the artists and creatives, the thinkers and scholars have challenged and resisted mainstream views of what America is. While the federal government, through the Department of Government Efficiency, eliminated support for culture in 2025, the president is expected to sign a bill that provides level funding for the NEA and the NEH, because he understands the power of culture. Today, the federal cultural policy is increasingly being used to elevate Western civilization over the diverse histories and experiences that make up this country. There is no doubt that the fight to control the narrative of our culture, of who we are, is happening here and now. JANM's Scrub Nothing campaign is a response to executive orders that prevent progress toward a multiracial democracy and acceptance of all people. The current review of the wall text in the Smithsonian's museums is a blatant attempt to control the narrative. We know that the U.S. was built on indigenous land, on slavery, on Western political thought and ideology. Despite the promise of we the people, the nation was not built with all people in mind. Some were afforded rights and power, while others were excluded by design. It is critical to remember those histories, acknowledging these injustices and other forms of oppression, because it allows us to build empathy, strengthen our democracy, and ensure that mistakes of the past are not repeated. That was a key priority of Senator Inoue in building the NCPD, to ensure that history is used not just to remember the past, but to advance democracy. When we talk about culture, we have to talk about assimilation, how it has functioned not only as a cultural expectation, but as a formal government policy. Immigrants have long been expected to assimilate into the dominant cultural norm as a condition of belonging. The Japanese American experience exemplifies this. In the 1940s, the US-born Nisei were encouraged by both their parents and by society to assimilate fully. As American. Many embraced that expectation, demonstrating deep patriotism and civic commitment, yet they were never fully accepted as American. During World War II, the constitutional protections were suspended, and Japanese Americans were excluded, removed, and incarcerated. The Nisei lost their civil liberties and their freedom, not because of their actions, but because of who they were perceived to be. And in 1988, the Civil Liberties Act found that the reason for that incarceration was because of racism, war hysteria or fear, and the failure of leadership. And we have all of those three elements happening in our society now. And the Nisei soldiers of World War II, who are the most decorated regimental combat team in US history, yet their story was removed in 2025 from the US Army's website in violation of executive orders on DEI. So that's a direct attempt of erasure to control the narrative at its best. As we think about how culture shapes democracy in practice, not just in theory, it brings us directly to the work of today's afternoon keynote by Glenn Kaino. Glenn's work often offers the emotional depth, shared language, and imaginative power, helping to transform individual experience into collective action at a moment when our nation and culture are rapidly changing. In his art, Glenn harnesses the power of culture to advance truth, justice, reform, and redress. His work invites critical reflection, builds empathy, and challenges us to understand the past in new ways, shaping narratives that deepen civic engagement today. As a descendant of people who were incarcerated during World War II, Glenn brings both historical memory and contemporary imagination to his work, offering a powerful example of how culture can help move democracy forward. This afternoon's panel also represents many creatives and scholars who, like Glenn, have contributed to challenging what our culture is by telling their own stories and lifting up histories that have often been left out. Through their work, They are shaping new ways of understanding our world, expanding whose experiences are recognized, whose voices matter, and whose ideas are valued. Together, these panelists have been at the forefront of questioning power, asserting presence, and affirming, this is my story, and it belongs in our shared cultural story. And that is what is at stake here, our collective culture, who we are, who belongs, and who we aspire to be. There is room for us all, so let's stand with the Japanese American National Museum on staying focused on contributing to the American story from our own diverse perspectives. Let us stand with the NCPD and remember that protest and resistance are our constitutional rights. Let's celebrate the artists and creatives, the poets and the writers, the thinkers and the scholars who have been and are on the front lines of what Senator Inoue envisioned as democracy in action. So now it's my distinct pleasure and honor to transition us to hear from the artists and creatives, the thinkers and the scholars. And we're really pleased to welcome an incredible artist and friend of Janum, Glenn Kaino. Glenn is an acclaimed contemporary artist whose practice spans across sculpture, painting, filmmaking, performance, installation, and large-scale public works. He also operates outside the traditional purview of contemporary art, instigating collaborations with other modes of culture, ranging from technology to music to political organizing. His works, In the Light of Shadow and With Drawn Arms, bridge the past to the present by exploring the power of collective action to forge a more just world and reckoning with racial justice in America. He's an Emmy Award-winning producer and documentarian. His films have been featured at the Tribeca Film Festival and South by Southwest. Glenn's work is included in the collections of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Orange County Museum of Art, the Hammer Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego, and his critically acclaimed virtual reality work, Aki's Market, was commissioned by Janum in 2023. Following Glenn's remarks, he will be joined on stage by Tyler Green, a historian, critic, author, and host of the Modern Art Notes podcast. He is the author of Carleton Watkins, Making the West American, which won the 2019 California Book Award Gold Medal, and the Emerson's Nature and Emerson's Nature and the Artists. His forthcoming book, tentatively titled Claiming Yosemite, The Civil War, the California Genocide, and the Invention of the National Parks, is planned for 2026. So please welcome Glenn Kaino.
All right, well, I set up. I'm going to take a picture of y'all, too. Because last time I was here was with my family. And my mom's going to recognize this vantage point. Because somehow I convinced my mom to sit up here on stage with me for a thing. So maybe you could if it's okay, can you just say, like, hi, Ann and Ken? On three, like, hi, Ann and Ken. So 1, 2, 3. Hi, Ann and Ken. Oh, good sun points. Thank you, Rick and Jim and Ann and everyone for having me here. I'm Glenn Kaino. I thought, what a great segue into it, because the works that he mentioned I'm going to talk about and tell a few stories. I'm an artist, amongst other things that Rick had mentioned. And I like to say that I use art and the opportunities of art to connect people, places, and things that normally have a chance to connect. Because for me, art is a space of abstraction where expectations are still in our imagination. I also say art is the last place where there's no ROI or KPI except for, have you imagined a better world? No one really in an art museum, hopefully, has been, we're going to have this experimental art show and you're going to make this many dollars. That's not normally the formula when an artist is engaged to do a project. my studio is driven by what I call a constellation of concerns. These are long-term fields of study that I have incorporated into the practice for the entire, my entire career. Not every project engages each one of these ideas, but these are the ideas that create the base of scholarship from which I operate. And I also say that I use art, I use the spaces of art as ways to incubate ideas, to challenge the most rigorous and difficult problems of our world, because again, the space of institutional art making to me is a protected space of imagination. But sometimes I think that I've said I make discoveries inside a circumstance of art that deserves bigger publics. And that is inherently a contradiction with some art, because contemporary art has created some type of value associated with scarcity. And there's an inherent contradiction between that and populousness. And for me, as an idea-driven practice, I'm mostly interested only in ideas and change-making and the way people think and our place on the planet and my place on the planet. So today I'm going to tell two stories. They're hopefully 9 minutes long and we'll be on time. Two stories about two projects to help illustrate the pathways from which those have worked for me, and also maybe as a model to think about. The first was started out with this image. Maybe many of you know this image. It's an image in 1968, Tommy Smith, John Carlos, Peter Norman, at the Olympic Games. I had a small picture of this taped to my iMac, a 4x5. This is literally the black and white one, taped to the corner of my iMac for my entire career. And years ago, a friend of mine walked into my studio and he said, "Oh, Coach Smith, you want to meet him?" And I was like, wait a minute, hold on. Coach is only the name you call someone who's been your coach. Like, you don't just know someone's a coach and call him, "Hey, coach." And so I said, "Yeah, I want to meet him." He walks to the corner of the studio, came back 5 minutes later and said, "They want to meet you." I'm like, "Get the fuck out of here. What are you talking about? They want to meet me." He says, "They want to meet you." So I booked 2 tickets right there to Atlanta. And I fly to Atlanta. That was like on a Tuesday. Friday, he sits me on the couch, shakes my hand at the door, and he plays the race that he won in slow motion on an old VHS machine, like, right? And he starts narrating the entire race to me, and I'm like, "Oh, this is amazing." And an hour on the hour of him talking, his wife, Delois, cuts him off and says, "Tommy, shut up. Glenn, why are you here?" She says, "Yeah, Tommy will talk all night long if you let him, but we need to know why you're here." And I said, "I'm a conceptual artist. I'm not here to pitch you anything. I just met you. But I do have an observation." And he said, "What is that?" I said, "It strikes me that you live in a bit of a time bubble." They said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I was born after that happened, so for me it's only been a picture. But for you it's very personal. You shook my hand with that hand. You brush your teeth with that hand. You drive with that hand. The rest of us, the world just knows the hand up in the air." I said, "What if we could collaborate on a project that functions now, allowing you to be a witness of this rich history that you've created for all of us?" And he said, he starts to get emotional. And he says, "What do we do next?" I said, "Well, you come to LA and I'll take the arm off your body." He says, "Well, you're not going to cut my arm off." I said, "No, I'm going to cast. I'm going to cast of your arm. I'm going to cast your arm." And so I cast his arm. And when the arm came, when the positive, when you make a mold, you make a positive. The positive came off. He pointed. You see his wrist? You see that dark spot underneath his glove? He pointed at that and he says, "You know what that is, son?" I said, "No, what is that, sir?" He says, "That's a class muscle." I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "You only get that from picking cotton. So when I'm on that stage, I flex it to let everyone know that even if you pick cotton, you're up here with me." I got chills. And I asked him, I said, "Well, sir, can we record all these meetings? Because it strikes me that you're telling me some stories that have never been told." And he said, "Yes." So we made a film together of all of our journeys, and we traveled for 10 years making shows around the world. High Museum of Art, Leon Biennial. We were nominated for an Emmy. My Emmy win was with Oprah Winfrey. But we're nominated for an Emmy for this film. But most importantly, many months after making that first cast with the class muscle in the arm, we debuted this. Oh, wow. That's what I love to hear. It's a large-scale monument it's a 100-foot-long monument made out of 200 of Tommy's arms, 1 meter long. But the funny was, so we start working together, and we start making this bridge, and then Delois, Tommy's wife, the same with the cutoff after an hour. She says, "What are your goals for this partnership?" And I said, "To be in service." And I really didn't have any goals. I said, "I don't really have any goals." And she goes, "Great, because we have 3. And I said, "Great, of course I'll help. I'm here to help." And without even knowing what they are, I agreed to do it. And then she told me what they were. She said, 1, they want to meet Oprah. She said, 2, they want to be in the Smithsonian. And 3, they want to meet the president. Now, mind you, it's 2015, so it was that our president, and so. But out of those three, I spent 10 years working with Oprah Winfrey, just on a lot of different crazy, amazing things. And so at that one, I kind of felt I had on lock. I had seen Oprah a week after I met Tommy, and I said, Oprah, like, you're not going to believe it. I'm working with Tommy Smith now. Oprah's generous. She knew exactly who he was. She's like, Tommy Smith, Tommy Smith, and she said, I'll see him tomorrow. And it's not what I expected, because I've been around Oprah for a decade, and there's never a time when she's like, I'll do it tomorrow. And so I called Tommy and said, hey, I booked you the tickets. Come. And he says, Glenn, I'm too old to get on a plane right now. And he passed. Exactly. That's what I kind of did that in my mind. And now, if you, Anne, asked me to do 3 impossible things, and I do the first one for you, and you pass, I think I'm off the hook for all 3, but apparently not in the Smith household, because February of the next year, she calls me up and she says, Glenn, I want to remind you, you're on the clock. I said, what does that mean, ma'am? She says, we want to meet the president, not the ex-president. So this is February 2016, so election year. And so I called everyone. I have a disproportionate amount of friends. Hamza's probably the only person who knows more people who know President Obama than me. But we have, because of art, I called everyone I knew. I called Thelma and Theaster. They were in Aspen. They're like, I can't help you. Everyone I called said, no, can't help you. Finally, I called the White House every day. And I got them to say that they would get us in like they got Kobe Bryant in. And I said, it works for Kobe, works for me. How does that work? They said, get to DC on official business. We'll up your security clearance to Oval. Tell the president you're around, and if he wants to see you, he'll let you in. We said, fantastic. And so they didn't know that I had just met Lonnie Bunch, who you saw in the video. And Lonnie, famously at that point in the development of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, did not have anything from Tommy, because Tommy was holding out for a big check, did not know how institutional stewardship worked and nonprofits. And so I explained to Tommy, there's money you're not going to get. President, you can meet. Let's go. So I flew to DC with a bunch of free stuff for Lonnie Bunch and no invitation to the White House. And on my birthday, they invited us in. And it was great because I made this drawing for President Obama. It's a drawing of Tommy Smith passing the baton to a 4th runner. World record time is the first time 4 American men broke the world record in the relay. We were able to give it to President Obama in the Oval. And on the back, Tommy wrote this great inscription. He says, I can only imagine the length of passage, but most importantly, the baton was not dropped. Congrats on a successful 8. And this is my humble brag, but there's 2 points. One is that there's 4 people smiling and not 5. And I am not smiling because at the end of our visit, after we talked about intersectionality, civil rights, the role of art in democracy, President Obama says, guys, let's take a photo. And at that point, I wasn't an artist or friend of Tommy. I was a producer, and I was running around. There were 6 people in the room, but the 6th person was Pete with the camera. But I'm just seeing 6 figures, and I'm trying to get Tommy to stand where I'm standing. So I'm running around, pushing people around, but President Obama sees me acting like a fool, and he says, Glenn. From the minute you all walked in here, it's been meet Tommy. Come here, birthday boy. Now, I had just talked to my daughter beforehand about meeting the president. It might not happen, but I certainly did not practice posing with the president of the United States. So I was like, are we doing B-boy? Right? Like, are we doing prom? But his hand goes like this, so my hand reciprocates like this. Somehow, my hand slips into his jacket. You don't see it there. I'm actually in his jacket, and I give him a little squeeze right at that moment. And I literally say, you're fit, Mr. President. He says, it's better to be 44 than 55, son. And that's me squeezing the side of President Obama. Happy to report, though, in 12 speeches around the month that we visited with him, President Obama said, pass the baton. Famously on a speech on CNN, but also at the Democratic National Convention, he talked about, he reverberated sort of the conversation we had in some ways. Tommy called me crying during the DNC, talking about, did you hear him say pass the baton? We just said that. This is actually the baton that was in the drawing. And at the time also, there was like an NFT craze going on, and so we were asked to do one, and so we actually made a generative NFT called Pass the Baton, and we created thousands of batons with different. We said Tommy's baton had his teammates' names on them with their split times. Our batons looked like sneaker culture, like Kobe's, and we had contributions from some of the most important leading voices in the world who fought for voice and democratic rights. And Pass the Baton was the largest coalition of civil rights activists in the world. The street level activists were 80 million. We raised $700,000 for them in an hour when we minted the NFT and got onboarded all those organizations onto the blockchain and got them paid. We also part of the process with Tommy, I also ended up getting him on the cover of a Wheaties box. He had never been on the cover of a Wheaties box before. I called the CEO of Wheaties and I actually convinced the first ever artist designed Wheaties box. We ended up getting 1.4 billion impressions. But again, back to philanthropy and what we do too, my team and my lawyer, we also helped Tommy launch his nonprofit foundation, the Tommy Smith Youth Initiative. And the most recent example of how a project reverberates into the mainstream, I was at the gala and Ambassador Andrew Young was the honoree, and he got up on stage, and I make the award every year, and he got on stage and he starts bragging just like every politician does when they start talking to Tommy, even though Tommy broke 13 world records, not them. Andrew Young gets up on stage and he says, "Tommy, did I ever tell you how good I was at basketball?" And Tommy looks at him and is like, "No, you want to tell me?" He says, "Dr. King and I used to play basketball to connect with kids in the movement." I dropped my fork. I ambushed Andrew Young in the parking lot and I said, "I've never heard that story before." Turns out Dr. King used to play 5-on-5 with kids to connect with them in the playground. And I ended up calling my friend Michael Latt, who was unfortunately and tragically killed in the process of making this project. We made a project called Hoops, Hopes, and Dreams that just debuted on Monday, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, on Hulu, and this is a little sizzle. But no, it's a way that an idea moves into the mainstream. And if you had told 15-year-old wannabe artist me that at one point I would write a small but distinct chapter of Martin Luther King's legacy that had never been told, I never would have believed it except for through art. This is the film. And I just got this on Instagram. Some kid texted me, he says, "Congratulations on your new film. I watched your film twice and I loved it. My favorite part was the animation because it was really cool and well made. I also like the photos and videos you added of Hoops, Hopes, and Dreams. I learned a lot about civil rights movement. I also liked your animating style, film 10 of 10. But the best one is on the bottom. It says Fire Film." Love that. And so, again, thank you. Quickly, I know we're going to run a few minutes over, but so the other project, which I might explain a little bit of the image on the cover of the brochure for this. So this is a monument, actually switching full subjects. This is a monument moving to Europe. This is in Northern Ireland, in a city called Derry. It's the monument. It's called the Free Dairy Monument. 25 years ago or more, I was invited to a dinner with Jerry Adams, and I met Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness back when Jerry was the president of Sinn Féin, the political faction of the IRA, and it was prior to Martin running it. It was Willie Brown, Tom Hayden, myself, a few other folks, and about 50 FBI agents outside. But Jerry explained the IRA, and I've been a big student of change making, and he explained, the struggle in a way that was totally different than you read in a book. It was like his charisma was overpowering to me. I think he said to me just like, "Great to meet you, Glenn," and I was willing to do whatever he wanted, and I understood the aura. Several years later, after that, in my studio, sitting in my studio watching a new platform called YouTube, this video came across our desk from the IRA, and we all started crying in my studio, having had this deep connection.
My name is Shannon Walsh. I'm a Republican ex-prisoner, and I've been asked by the leadership of Óglaigh na hÉireann to read the following statement. The leadership of Óglaigh na hÉireann has formally ordered an end to the armed campaign. This will take effect from 4 p.m. this afternoon. All IRA units have been ordered to dump arms. All volunteers have been instructed to assist the development of purely political and democratic programs through exclusively peaceful means.
So this is actually the ceasefire announcement for the Good Friday Agreement when that Jerry, when we met him, was dreaming about. And so for us to watch in real time, like a political moment, happen was very powerful. And as you saw in the Tommy Smith clip, if you didn't recognize him, Congressman John Lewis was there. I spent a lot of time with Congressman Lewis, who talked about not only peaceful protests, but an event called Bloody Sunday, in Selma. And as I had kind of referenced, I had spent a lot of time in the music business, some time with Bono, and heard some stories about Sunday, Bloody Sunday. So I had a big exhibition at a museum called Mass Mocha that I said to the curators, I'm probably the only person who's heard the story of Bloody Sunday from Jerry Adams, John Lewis, and Bono directly. And I said, I'd like to do a project about the correlation, about the struggle, about the universal struggle for voice and for democracy, across these landscapes. And so actually, I'll play a little snippet, but this sculpture started out as a border wall. that is bent upon itself. So instead of dividing people apart, it brings people together as you just continually walk through. It's called In Revolutions. But what I did is I tuned every one of these bars so it plays a note of a song. You'll hear it in a second, but there was a young fellow that was in the President Obama photo to my right, young African-American man. He works in my studio's name is Dion Jones. He came to me because a fellow, one of Obama's best friends called me up and said, I have a young man coming to LA from DC. I need you to beat the DC out of him. I said, I could do that. He always wanted to be a singer. He was protesting during George Floyd, and he called me up because he had got shot in the face by a police officer, by a rubber bullet. And he FaceTimed me from the ambulance. And I at that moment, I said, we're not going to let this define you as a victim. We're going to use this as a moment of transformation. And so we ended up recording a song with him, singing Sunday, Bloody Sunday. And this is the cut.
They won't let us leave. They will not let us leave. We're boxed in all around. We're boxed in all around.
Yeah, we donated all the proceeds from that clip to Stacey Abrams' campaign because Stacey's mom baptized Dion, and there's a really great friend of ours who became really famous after he recorded this. It might be coincidence. His name is John Baptiste, who did the piano for us, and our friend Glenn Kochi played the chimes. This is the resulting exhibition. It's a large-scale immersive show at Mass MoCA. That was a 26-minute shadow puppet show. It started with a ship sculpture floating in the middle of the gallery space that is reminiscent of the ship called the Shadow 5 that was blown up by the IRA when they killed Lord Mountbatten. But it was a tragedy because it was the IRA's biggest success, but it was also the pivot to their failure because Lord Mountbatten was the only royal that had any level of understanding of what the struggle was about. As the shrapnel from the ship explodes across the gallery, you'll see like lighting, highlights different shadow puppet vignettes that are animated throughout the course of a 26-minute show. These are just the correlation that actually is in the music video. In the show, what we found out in the research is that minutes before the shooting of Bloody Sunday in Derry, the crowd was singing "We Shall Overcome." And they had no idea, most of them, that the song was from the American South. If you go to the Free Derry Museum, the first thing you see is a tribute to Dr. King. So these are other sort of details of the shots, including the one that is on the cover of the Democracy Center. I'm the only person who said I wanted to make Mass MoCA look bigger by doing a replica of the Free Derry Monument at the end of the stage. And then, this is a video. If you could So I'm sort of rounding the corner to get Tyler, but or just hang out with Tyler. They're really great coda on all the stories again in terms of how we try to use art as a propellant into making change. As our young fellow Dion, who you saw in a moment of injury, happy to announce that he was on the TV show The Voice, and he won 4 episodes, didn't win the show, but now has a global platform from people hearing his voice literally from my exhibition. Which is great. The Tommy Smith Bridge sculpture is now a permanent acquisition in the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So now Tommy is in both museums. Really great and very powerful. Also full circle because it was on the cover of a book called The Shape of Power for the show from which it debuted, which is also referenced in the executive order that Rick was talking about, that we're talking about in terms of the contest of our democracy. And so when the Smithsonian called and said, how does it feel that your artwork is on the cover of a book that is on their desk, driving them to draft an executive order? I said, well, my people are familiar with executive orders. And the next project I'm working on is derivative of the Janum show, and it's called Fox and Crane. And it's actually a story that I'm creating with a writer, a wonderful collaborator named Dave Callahan, who's most known for writing a movie called Shang-Chi, Legend of Ten Rings, and Across the Spider-Verse. And he's Chinese. The story of a Chinese boy illegally incarcerated in a Japanese-American internment camp. And it's about otherness within otherness, but allies, intersection allyship. Last little bit is I usually open with this, and I know Tyler want to talk about this. This is a last little bit. It's not a big thing. It's like literally 1 minute bit. It's a flag. Starts out an all-white American flag, and I don't know if you know the warning, but you're not supposed to put an oily rag in a bucket, otherwise it'll light itself on fire. Okay, so we do that on purpose. So I tie-dye the flag with a Confederate-era tarring solution, and in full transparency, not tar and feathering. It's a little more viscous. It's for waterproofing, but it's the same. It's a close cousin. And after 2.5 to 3 hours, the flags light themselves on fire. Yeah. And my artistic gesture is flag extinguishing, fire extinguishing, because there's a whole history of flag burning, but not much of extinguishing, right? But when we show it in museums, and we had one at Janum, we show it with a very specific light that displays it like this. And so it still casts the pristine shadow of the flag. And so I when thinking about democracy, I think about this in that despite the charred exterior of the moments that we're living through now, ideally they're value systems that are embedded deep within us. So thank you so much. So, yeah.
Thank you, Glenn, not only for the talk, but for allowing my good side to be facing the audience.
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad you talked about bridge because I wanted to bring it up. So the space Bridge is in at the Smithsonian American Art Museum is far and away their grandest, most dramatic space. It's multi-floors. It's where their historical sculpture collection is. It's where their open paintings and sculpture storage is. So the work does a lot of work in that space, including making it contemporary, while also referring to history. This is a moment when the Smithsonian and its commitments to the present and its commitment to the fullness of the U.S. experience is under literal daily attack from the regime. Do you worry about your work there? Do you wonder if it will be targeted, if it will be removed? What will happen to it?
I would say that we think about it. I would not characterize it as worry. Only because for me, art making is not about an end result. It's not about an object, or a placement or an acquisition. It's about history and about a story through the process. So I think about it in that we've thought about like what happens when, if, what happens if. But worry would kind of, I think, puts into place like, do I worry that it's going to be taken down or removed? And I would say if it gets taken down, there is a story attached to that becomes a moment, that becomes public discourse, that we then mobilize. And I think anyone who makes monuments, we for every work that we do, we have to think about, I think about monuments as a time capsule that where one asserts ideas into the future. Right? Like they call it monuments because monuments are freaking hard to make. It's a monumental effort. They're monumental oftentimes in scale, and for the Smithsonian, it's a permanent acquisition. So the deaccessioning process is like 6 years. Like if 40 institutions have to pass on it, and just getting those board meetings will take 5 years, and so, when I think about that monuments, I think about like what is the purpose of it, and asserting our ideas and kind of like stamping this moment. So
a whole lot of your work, as you referenced in your first slide, marries an interrogation of the past, references to the present, and almost all of it includes elements of hopefulness. So you marry hope to kind of an often pointedly critical viewpoint. When in your process of becoming who you are, did hope become something you wanted to make fundamental to major works?
So I had a pretty rough childhood. It sort of kicked out of 5 high schools and sort of didn't find my place. And a lot has to do with like identity and Asian American identity, being respected. And but I would say there's a distinct moment in my professional practice that happened. There was a curator named Ann Pasternak, who's wonderful. Ann came to my studio. And I was with some other older artists, won't name them. We pitched what I thought was an amazing project, and she rejected us like bluntly at the table in my studio. And I was like, well, that's really fantastic. That's what rejection feels like. Cool. And I walked her out because it was my shop, and I said, and she leans over and she whispers and she points at that group and she says, hey, our generation, because she's a little bit older than me, she goes, our generation had learned to tear things down and deconstruct and tear things apart. You have a gift of putting things back together. Call me when you're putting things back together, and we'll have a show. And she won't claim that story now, but for me, as a young person, to that always like grew up listening and believing Duchamp and believing, when I met John Baldessari, I was like, I believed you. I didn't know it was a joke, because for me, like I think value systems of what art, I believe in art, I believed in the transformative power. And so when Anne said that to me, it was sort of my license to be courageous, to think about how to put hopefulness into the practice. And I made a magic show, which will take another 40 minutes to talk about. But we made a magic show that we used to say, it's where hope meets dope. Like we just want to make amazing things so that cynical people could not be jaded and tear us down for being hopeful.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what was the work, and what was not in it that you added to make it work?
It was like I don't quite recall exactly the formation of the work. I know it was for the Olympics like years ago, and it was I say 84, whatever, the 94 Olympics or whatever it was. It was a I would say standard fare early 90s deconstructed critical attack work that was like deconstructing systems. You know what I mean? It was like there's a lot of that in the it was a public engagement. She was running Creative Time, and so I think that what was not there was an explicit, courageous attempt to make change. It was attempt to consider change through dismantling, and I think we have to pivot towards suggesting rather than just dismantling. And so I'm in the business of suggesting, I try to be, and I really appreciate everyone who dismantles, because without the parts, there's a term I use called kit bashing, which is putting together disparate pieces of objects and things. And without people and the generations before me that have dismantled and where I can see legible pieces of social histories and how constructions work, without that, putting things back together is harder if you don't have a pile of pieces, A
really good example of your work that points to hope is spontaneous combustion, the flag. Was the core idea of that work that the American flag would somehow remain present? Or did that just come along later?
That quickly became the core idea. The first, that started as an exploration of capillary action as performance, and the idea of how oils can dominate fabrics and create color. Quickly it became dangerous, and I've spent a lot of time in illusion making, and I had that idea of this pretty early on in the development of the artwork. It took about 18 months to actually perfect the technique where it was viable.
To make the flag viable, or to start fires?
All of it. Because the way it works, just if you're curious, the way it works is if I do this wrong, it's going to burn. And everyone's like, no, it doesn't. That doesn't really work. And you put it down there, and everyone sits there for an hour, and you go, see, it didn't work. And then one day, I told one of my studio assistants, I said, just sit here all day, and he had a laser thermometer, and he's sitting there, and for the first hour, he's slacking off, and I'm like, look, just sit here, because if it does burn, we're going to be screwed if it's a fire. And so after 2.5 hours, I hear clang, 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 and the whole team runs out in the backyard, and just whoosh, and it's like the flag gone. Because when it starts to go and when it starts to burn, it's like, again, 2.5 to 3 hours, it goes in like 30 seconds. So you'll wait there, and it's an exercise in patience. You're sitting there waiting with a thermometer, and it's like, oh, it's 92 degrees, 90 degrees, 92.1 degrees. Is this the moment? Nope, 94. And then it's like 100, 150. And then it's like gone. So it took a year to like figure out the process.
And when in that year does the importance of the American flag as a projection of American ideals?
Oh, from the jump. From the jump. Yeah.
So how did you? What brought that idea forward? I mean, I should point out, contemporary artists for 40 years, since at least David Hammond's, have loved playing with the American flag. Yeah. Every 10 years, somebody at a museum somewhere in the United States does an American flag show, and there's so much good work out there about the U.S. flag that it's always a good show. Yeah. So what about doing the flag attracted you?
I think just for the dialogue that I like to have, the hopeful dialogue I like to have, and for me, it's about a lot of the work is about memory, but again, memory into the present, and I think out of the ashes becomes, and for me, when I realized and figured out that this is a viable image that I could create, and it's really powerful in person, because it defies logic when you look at it in person. You're like, this is not possible. We showed it at a couple of museums, and people were rubbing the wall as if I was drawing on the wall in a Trump law or something. And so, it was there from the jump, and I'm very happy that. I feel very proud of this work, and I feel very proud that like when it goes to these shows, and if you know the cure, the next one, tell them. But that it could stand its ground, in that narrative of like how we've considered our democracy, and so for me, this has always been a piece about the complications of patriotism, because even for 1942 and the 442nd, as a Japanese American, it's really complicated how we think about our place in this country, and it actually is complicated until moments like now, and you're like, oh, it's not complicated, don't do that, but we hope to get it to be back to be a complicated place.
I want to wrap up our chat in a way that points to the panel that's coming up next. There is a quote that there's something you said in a conversation a number of years ago with Laurie Furstenberg, in which you said, quote, "My entire practice is rooted in my belief of what art can be, that art can have real agency and create positive change." I agree with that. But it's an idea that a lot of people in the art world, both artists and art historians and critics, and I won't even mention dealers, tend to dismiss or shrug off. What taught you, or how did you learn or come to recognize that art and artworks can have impact and impacts outside the art silo in the broader world?
Well, I think for me, like it's been a journey and an evolution. But I was, as I mentioned, I had a troubled youth, and I was in Asian gangs, and next thing you know, I see a flash art magazine, and I read about what art could be, because my mom was just like throwing any ideas at the table to try to get me to sort of get on a positive track in life. And I was always an artist illustrating. I would make work, and didn't know it was like artwork that I was making in a way. I was not conscious of that per se. And then, once I realized that, there was an elevated discourse around ideas, and this is pre-art market. So this is really before the boom of like the sales of art, in a way. I thought I'd just be super broke sitting there making work for museums and suggesting big ideas into the world. And I was like very happy with that, and I think that what happens is, or what at least my experience is, in a way, when the critical apparatus became too intrinsically linked to the commercial apparatus to construct value, hope was left off the table, and because it's super great to say this person's a public scholar, they're really important because they do this, and therefore their work is this valuable. It's hard to say this person has a crazy idea how the world might work, and it might seem naive. Is that cool? I don't know. And there's no historical precedent for suggestions of newness, and historical precedent is what scholarship is based on, and it's also what value is based on. And so I've just thankfully been grateful to be able to piece together a career trying to suggest new things.
Art too is based on historical precedent. So we're there. First of all, it's amazing that your mother gave you a copy of Flash Art. Like Flash Art's a pretty deep pull.
I know. I think it was like a newsstand. Like she saw the word art and was like, you know what I mean?
Was there an artwork that convinced you that art had impacts outside the silo of art's own making?
Yeah, I mean, early in my career, I mean, David Hammons, Hammons was my hero. Daniel Joseph Martinez, hero. Ulysses Jenkins. These are Catherine Lord wrote my grad school recommendation letter. I mean, that school, of artists, Karen Finley, Ron Athey, the NEA4. I mean, that I grew up with, looking up to those folks. So, all those people sacrificed their lives for us and me, and to be able to even suggest that there's an idea that we could do this for a living.
Great example of a work 50 yards from where we're sitting that I think does a really good job of having impacts outside the art silo is Barbara Kruger's great piece on the side of MoCA. If you haven't seen it, go walk to the end of the building. Monuments is in, turn right, and look at the side of the building. It's one of the great public artworks in the United States.
Yeah,
Glenn
yeah, absolutely.
Glenn, thank you.
Thank you so much.